Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dougie. I'm the Executive Director of Community Connections. We provide support coordination, plan management, flexible family support services to about 250 individual people with disability, most of whom are NDIS participants, their families and supporters. I've been with the organisation for 4 months, and before I say any more, I would also, like others, acknowledge I'm on Ngunnawal land and pay my respects to Aboriginal people, their elders past and present. Alison and I didn't have a proper chance to talk about the title of what I was going to say. And I know that I've been asked to say something within the realms of innovation, because Community Connections, for a brief period of time, thanks to a small $50,000 grant from Community Services Directorate, supported people through home share arrangements, which I'm not sure it's that innovative an idea, people living together and getting on with one another. I've done it sometimes, but it did provide one option for some of the people that we supported and hopefully continue to support, in which people with disability who needed a range of supports in their lives, but would be matched up, thanks to the support of our home share manager, Lee Harrison, with others who needed somewhere to live, perhaps often might have come from, just like most people with disability, lower socio-economic sections of the population, or poor people, as we call them where I come from, because there was a synergy, a property. People with one particular kind of need, support, might be get out of bed, or switch on the telly, or help me with the shopping, or whatever, or just be there to make sure that my parents feel that I'm safe overnight, with other people who had a different kind of need, but shared at least the need to have somewhere to live. And that, I think we ran the home share project for a period. It was and is successful for those people we are currently supporting. It's relatively small numbers of people that we've been able to support. And in some senses, it is also a minority interest, because living with other people, certainly in the basis of my life history so far, can sometimes be difficult and complicated. And bringing complete strangers together and unifying them as a domestic unit is not always easy. And so here comes Dougie's plea for some more money, please, is that it takes, in our home share arrangement, somebody like our home share manager to be able to help set up, maintain, sustain, keep going, and also firefight when things break down, because sometimes they do, and that involves working out exit strategies. And it takes time and effort and a willingness on everyone's part to participate in, but it also takes money. There's no getting away from that. So beyond that, I would also like to take a few minutes to say a few more things, if I may, because I think they're relevant to what I've been listening to today. Fantastic contributions of a great breadth. And forgive me if this isn't altogether entirely thought through, but that's the nature of the beast that I am. So, we have concentrated a lot of our conversation on SDA today, as rightly we should, and including all those people who have presented on the topic and spoken about it, have mentioned that it's 6% of the population of people with disability who will join the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which means it doesn't apply to 94%. And let's keep, if you don't mind me innovating here as I go along, let's keep taking that out. The National Disability Insurance Scheme, of which some of you who know me will know, I am an unenthusiastic supporter, to such an extent, this has relevance, I'll come back to it, to such an extent that I moved to Canberra 6 years ago to help launch the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and I refer to this because it does have a connection to housing. But the National Disability Insurance Scheme, at best, provides individual support packages to no more than 15% of all people with disability who live in Australia, which means the NDIS doesn't provide support. This is not a criticism, it's a statement of fact. Doesn't provide support to 85% of people with a disability, all of whom need to live somewhere. In the ACT, there are 147,000 individual dwellings, I am reliably informed by somebody's report somewhere on a government website that I forgot, even though I only looked at it about 3 hours ago to check the number. So here's another thought, because some of the stuff that's been said about new build this morning is really, really fascinating and interesting. And I can't tell you how personally heartened I am to hear everybody in the room talk about the silver, gold, and platinum standards of livable housing, because I was a member of Bill Shorten's dialogue on universal housing design 8 to 10 years ago, and then joined the board of Livable Housing that nutted out how we should describe these different standards, and helped to introduce them. But I do take Michael's point from this morning that 8 or 9 years ago, through Bill Shorten's fantastic dialogue around universal housing design, it was agreed to adopt a voluntary programme, which said that by 2020, or 18 months from now, less than that, all new houses would be, by virtue of this voluntary agreement, built to the minimum level of livable housing standards. Well, we all know that's not going to happen. The voluntary strategy has been tried and failed miserably, it has to be said, despite the best efforts of those providers, builders who have taken the standards seriously and attempted to put them into place. One of whom we're going to hear from, I think, later on today, Andrew Kerrick from I met him through the Inclusion Council, who's building houses to, I think, platinum and gold standards here in the ACT. There are providers, builders who are doing this. But the simple fact of the matter is that we're not making the progress on the design of these new houses. Do make this point, I'm only talking about new houses, and that we need to change that. And so the reference this morning to the current review that's taking place, that's been organised through the Australian Buildings Code, I think it is critically important. And here's why I don't think any of this is innovative. I really don't, and I speak from experience, because one of the last tasks I did before I emigrated from Scotland to Australia 19 years ago was to contribute to the development of what was known, for anyone that cares about boring titles for government programmes, the revision of parts T and M of the British Building Code, which 19 years ago decided that all new build in the United Kingdom should be built to the minimum level of visitable housing so that people with mobility impairments and others could at least get in and out the houses. So the fact that we haven't even arrived there yet in Australia suggests that we've got some catching up to do. And I think we all have a responsibility in this room to contribute to the debate that's going on about whether or not this standard that is laudable and accepted by ACT Housing and all of us in this room as a good and desirable thing to achieve should not become the exception, but should become the rule. And for any of the builders, financiers, property development people who are in the room and worried about whether or not it's too difficult to achieve, let me just remind you that the UK building industry did not collapse overnight. They retooled the machines that cut the doors out, and it brought down the costs of renovation. But let me keep expanding beyond that observation, because the really important, another really important thing to remember is that, and this doesn't just apply to design, it applies to everything we've been talking about so far. In the 147,000 dwellings that already exist in Canberra, most of the adults of Canberra who are already alive will, for the whole of their life, live in a house that has already been built. And we all know that most of those houses haven't been built to be more inclusive for more people. And we need, therefore, to remember that we need to find ways to modify houses to make them livable for people who are currently around. Because we're not going to raise Canberra to the ground and start with 147,000 new dwellings all built to the livable housing gold standard. Because none of us want to camp out in Gilmore, as if where I live at the moment, for the, whilst they're replacing the houses that we currently live in. So, all of that goes to where? That I was thinking about, obviously, what I might say today that would be in any way of interest, so I'll talk about myself. I've been in my wheelchair for 34 years, which is more than half of my life. I checked the numbers on them. I have lived in at least 18 different houses. Some of them have been in the private sector, some of them in the social housing sector, some of them in the public sector. On 2 occasions, very shortly when I was young and irresponsible, I lived as a guest of Her Majesty, by which I do not mean in Buckingham Palace. I was arrested and in the nick for being drunk on a street in Glasgow. So I've had a restrictive practice or two in my past. What I'm trying to suggest, though, is even as a person with a disability, with moderately high support needs, who, when he ever gets around to filling out his application form, will become a participant of the NDIS. I have lived in a variety of tenures, in a variety of housing forms, with a variety of people in more than one location. And I think that sounds, for many people, like an ordinary life. And I think I fear, and the experience of my work with, in the 4 months I've been there, with Community Connections, providing support coordination to people with disability and their families, is that many, many people with disability, even despite the enormous progress of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, do not yet have the same range of choices and life opportunities as most of us take for granted, including myself as a person with a disability. And so we need to find a way to give people the support that they need to make choices about how they live. My organisation is agnostic about the housing form. There's a spectrum from building I make no comment about this, good or ill, as a spectrum from spending $150 million to purchase and build 70 5-bedroom group homes to help in the reprovisioning of Stockton up in New South Wales, through to an individual mum and dad with a son or daughter who's 45 years old and for whom they have been working to support them for all of their lives in sometimes situations that approach crisis, even when you've got an NDIS plan. And some of the support coordination that we do, in a small number of cases, is about intervening to help maintain people in their own home by trying to put a housing situation or maintain a housing situation in a rapidly unraveling situation, because I know for at least 2 of the people we've supported that the housing alternative, if those things break down, is called the jail, because their challenging behaviours, or whatever the current terminology might be, means that it would be very difficult to find another short-term accommodation for them. And because they are either a danger to themselves or to others, they will find themselves either sedated in a hospital or they will be taken to the NIC. And those ought not to be the options that people are presented with. So we need to find together, if we can, ways that respect the range of choices that individuals will make, the range of needs that all those different families have, and to do it in a way that at the same time allows the kind of development and life growth that I think I've been fortunate to be able to benefit from as somebody who lives a kind of full life, but unfortunately ended up being a C5-6 quadriplegic in a wheelchair because I made a mistake 35 years ago when I went to the beach down in Scotland and broke my neck. And here's where this comes back to my personal history and how things become problematic. When I was offered the position of branch manager, communications and engagement with the National Disability Insurance Agency by the first chief executive, David Bowen, I didn't even think twice. I just said on the phone, yes, David. It never occurred to me until my second conversation with David that actually the National Disability Insurance Scheme was going to be based in Canberra, 352 kilometres, or 312 kilometres from where I was actually living, which was called Sydney. You may have heard of it. But I just wanted to work to launch the NDIS. And I came to Canberra with its 147,000 dwellings and could not find not one private sector landlord that would be prepared to modify a shower room or a bathroom so that I could then rent it for the period of my non-ongoing contract with the National Disability Insurance Agency, so that I could make the transfer from one city to another to take up a job that, as a skilled person with a track record of being able to do what I do, would allow me to fulfill my ambition. Fortunately, because I was able to come as a member of the senior executive service of the Australian Public Service, unlike most people with disability who live on disability support pension, and because the NDIA at the time decided, until you find some accommodation, Dougie, we'll put you up in a stupid little hotel in Northbourne Avenue, but we'll pay the costs of that hotel for you. I was able to make a transition from one city to another, and because I was earning what I regard as a ridiculously large amount of money, to be perfectly frank, more money than a human being actually really needs, but because of that, I was able to buy my way out of a problem. And that's why I now have my second large mortgage for a house that is too big for me, on a flat level square block in Gilmore, because that's the place where I could find a piece of accommodation that was on the level and that had a cheaply modifiable bathroom that I could then pay personally for the modification, because at that stage the ACT wasn't a trial site, and so I couldn't join the NDIS and get them to pay my whole modifications for me. But most people don't have that flexibility. Just me and my partner, no children, a good wage, a long track record, in fact, an unbroken track record for over 30 years of having been in employment, and therefore discretionary income and an ability to move through a complex private sector housing process that would lead to the kind of outcome I wanted. But I think the reality from what I've heard from the rest of you today is that for most people with disability and their families, they don't have that flexibility. They don't have that discretionary income. They can't just buy their way out of a problem. And that unless and until we find a kind of collective response that allows people to provide the support that everybody needs at the point in time we need it, we will continue to have these kinds of forums in which we're struggling to find practical solutions, but which I have to say I am super impressed, particularly by this afternoon session, about the examples that we know are going on here in Canberra at the moment that will lead to better outcomes for people with disability and their families. But we need them to become standard, not exceptions. We need them to become easily accessible, and we need to make sure that they are guaranteed and in place at the point at which people need them. I'm not sure if that's in any way innovative, but it's what I've decided I want to say, so thank you very much for letting me do it.